having Buster on last week, it was a fun moment for me where I was able to thank him for helping me procrastinate in my studies as a senior at the University of Michigan. We are of the same age, but Jeremy, might have a little bit more on the shoulders than you because I skipped kindergarten back in the day to be a grade ahead of you and the rest of all of us in our age.
That's why you're class of 90.
Yes.
Kindergarten.
So you were a junior in Cornell, if I'm not mistaken, when that happened.
I was.
Were you skipping out of classes to see this? Do you remember where you were?
Well, it was a weekend, so there were no classes. But
no, I mean,
what was going on was it was on prime time in the U.S. It was an afternoon fight on a Sunday in Tokyo, Japan, at the Tokyo Dome. And they were fighting. It was about 11 o'clock Eastern time. I think about 8 o'clock. I mean, it would have been obviously 8 o'clock West Coast time. I think it was 11:08. Maybe it was more like 12:09. And I was in, of all places, that boxing hotbed, Hanover, New Hampshire, covering a college hockey game.
Fantastic.
Between the very formidable Big Red of Cornell and the not-so-formidable Big Green of Dartmouth. And I was trying to find somewhere to watch the fight. It was on regular HBO.
That's right.
And back, in the dark days of cable television, it was hard to find regular HBO in a place like Hanover, New Hampshire. I could not, but I asked around some people at Dartmouth if they had it. They didn't, or at least they told me they didn't. Maybe they just didn't want me hanging out with them watching the fight. And then later in the night, I ran into some guy who I'd asked earlier in the night. He said, "Did you hear what happened?" And, of course, like everybody else, I was stunned. I was floored. I had made an attempt to see it because I was a fight fan, in particular a fan of the heavyweight division. But I was like, what's the big deal anyway, right? Well, of course, it ended up being a huge deal. But you'll like this, Richard, because you are a student of history, a consummate student of history.
Connoisseur. I'm a connoisseur. Yes.
And as consequential as it was, 7 hours later, something much more consequential took place on the planet that was the lead story the next day in the New York Times rather than Buster Douglas defeating Mike Tyson. Do you have any idea what it was?
Well, despite being the connoisseur that you did point out to me, fill in the blanks for me, Jeremy. What was it?
Nelson Mandela walked free after more than a quarter century in prison, about 7 hours after Buster Douglas became the heavyweight champion of the world. Walked out of Victor Verster prison.
See, that's you, Jeremy, being you right there. That's your next level right there. That's your next level. And that's another reason why.
I appreciate that. I mean, think about that. I mean,
right.
You got this massive event in sports, and then you've got this massive event for the entire planet taking place.
Right. What did your dad think of the fight? What was his take when he heard about it, Jeremy?
I mean, I didn't go back. It would have been interesting to go back and look at the sports reporters from that morning. But the sports reporters, which, of course, was on Sunday mornings back then, would have been the first place where many people found out about the outcome because, a lot of people were in bed by the time it ended around midnight. And people would wake up on Sunday mornings then and turn on ESPN. And my father, he wasn't just doing the sports reporters. He was like doing the, remember that Sunday morning like hosting thing he would do? Typically was Robin Roberts.
Sure.
And, she'd be in Bristol and he'd be in New York. So, actually I should have gone back and looked exactly at what they had to say. But he'd been to a lot of Tyson fights at that point. I'm sure he was as stunned as everybody else. If he hadn't been, he would have put money on Douglas.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.